I didn't always walk with my head high, I didn't always speak with conviction, and I didn't always know who I was or what I was meant to do. No. There was a time, not too long ago, when I was lost. Completely lost. You see, people look at a man once he's risen, and they forget that every mountain has a base in the dirt. Every giant has known weakness. Every revolution has a beginning, and mine began in a place no man wants to go, prison. That cold, hard place, a concrete coffin built for the living, a space where time don't move and hope don't breathe. That's where I found myself. Not as a leader, not as a brother, not even as a man. I entered that place as a shadow of a human being, stripped of power, stripped of dignity, stripped of purpose. The worst thing that ever happened to me, it wasn't getting caught. It wasn't the sentence. It wasn't even the years that slipped through my fingers like sand. It was that I had been dead long before they ever closed the cell door behind me. 'Cause let me tell you something most people don't want to admit. The worst prison ain't built from bricks and bars. The worst prison is ignorance. And I was locked up in that long before I was ever put in chains. I walked free, but I didn't know who I was. I laughed loud, but I didn't know what I stood for. I dressed sharp, talked slick, but I was empty, hollow. I was Malcolm Little, a name handed to me by the same system that crushed my father, silenced my mother, and told me I was nothing before I even had the chance to speak. So when I landed in that cell, I didn't just lose my freedom. I lost the illusion. I could no longer pretend. When there's nowhere to go and nothing left to hide behind, the truth shows up. And it don't knock, it breaks through the door. That was my grave. I laid there in that cell, buried under my own mistakes, my own lies, my own self-hatred. And I had two choices: rot in that ground or rise up from it. Not as the same man, but as someone entirely reborn. You want to know what saved me? It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even time. It was a dictionary. That's right, a book. Letters, words, meaning. I picked it up, and it picked me up. I started from the beginning, A to Z, word after word, copying them down, writing them out. Not because someone told me to, but because for the first time in my life, I wanted to know. I wanted to understand. I wanted to be something more than what this world told me I was supposed to be. That cell became my classroom, my monastery, my battlefield. Every page I read, I was tearing down a piece of the old me. Every word I wrote, I was building a foundation for the new me. I devoured history, philosophy, religion. I studied the words of black leaders who refused to bow, who refused to forget where they came from. I read the truth about Africa, about slavery, about the lies they told in those school books. I learned who I really was and who they were afraid I would become. You see, prison didn't break me. It exposed me. It stripped me of everything false, everything fake, everything weak. I was a hustler on the outside, but inside that cell, I became a soldier, not with fists, not with guns, with knowledge, with clarity, with the kind of purpose that doesn't come from chasing money, women, or fame, but from standing in the mirror and finally seeing yourself truthfully for the first time. They thought they buried me in that cell. They thought they had erased me, silenced me, reduced me to a number. But they made a mistake, because sometimes when you bury a man in darkness, all you do is plant him. I began to grow, I began to burn, I began to transform. The prison was supposed to be my end, but it became my beginning. A grave, maybe. But even graves crack open when something refuses to stay dead. People think the worst moment in your life is the one that destroys you. But I'm telling you, it can be the one that defines you. That cell taught me more than the streets ever did. It taught me discipline. It taught me focus. It taught me to think. And most of all, it taught me that change doesn't come when you run from pain. It comes when you sit in it, when you look it in the eye, when you ask yourself, is this who I really am? Is this who I'm meant to be? So many of our brothers are walking the streets every day with chains on their minds. You don't need a cell to be imprisoned. You don't need a sentence to be sentenced. The worst prison is the one where you believe the lie, that you can't change, that you're too far gone, that your past is your destiny. That's the trap I lived in, until I sat alone in that cage and realized I'm not who they say I am. I'm not who I was. I am who I choose to become, starting right now. Ignorance was my real prison. I didn't know it then, but I lived in a cage long before I ever touched the steel bars of a penitentiary. I thought I was free because I could move. I thought I was free because I could talk slick, wear a zoot suit, dance in Harlem, hustle on the corner, and chase anything that glittered. But that wasn't freedom. That was performance. That was survival. That was a life orchestrated by forces I didn't even understand. You can't be free when you don't know who you are. And I didn't. I didn't know my name. I didn't know my history. I didn't know my purpose. That was the worst kind of sentence. Living life blind, living life believing the lies of the enemy while calling them opportunity. They told me my past didn't matter. They told me my roots didn't matter. They told me my only value was what I could sell or steal or show. So I played the role. I played it well. Read the hustler. read the sharp dresser, read with the fancy talk and a fast hand, but deep down I was hollow. I was acting. I was repeating what I saw, what I thought manhood looked like in a country that never meant for me to become a man in the first place. I was angry and didn't even know why. I was bitter and didn't know what for. I was a puppet pulled by strings tied to ignorance. And the devil loves a man who doesn't know he's being controlled. It wasn't until I got behind bars that the curtain lifted, not because someone gave me a revelation, not because I had some vision from the sky. No, it started because I hit the wall. I hit that wall hard. The kind of wall you can't lie your way through. The kind of wall that doesn't care about how clever you are. The kind of wall that forces you to stop and look at your life without filters, without masks. That's what prison did for me. It stopped me long enough to face myself, and what I saw wasn't a man. It was a lost boy wearing the uniform of destruction. That's when I picked up a book, and then another, and then another. At first, it was just something to do, something to pass time. But before long, it wasn't about passing time. It was about reclaiming time, reclaiming all the years I'd spent believing that black meant inferior, that African meant savage, that the only power I could have was in my fists or in my hustle. I started to learn, and what I learned lit a fire in me. Not the fire of anger. I already had that. It was the fire of understanding, the fire of truth, the kind of fire that doesn't burn to destroy but burns to illuminate. I discovered that we had history long before chains touched our wrists. I discovered that Africa wasn't a jungle. It was a cradle of knowledge, mathematics, art, and civilization. I discovered that the so-called American dream was built on black backs, and that the system was never broken. It was built to work this way. I discovered that my people had been lied to generation after generation, told they were nothing, told they were ugly, told they were less. And worst of all, I discovered that we had come to believe it. That's the prison, the mental one. The one where you police yourself. The one where you limit your own thinking. The one where you kill your own potential before anyone else has to. You can lock up a man's body, but if his mind is free, he's still dangerous. But you free a man's body and keep his mind in chains. He'll never rise. He'll never question. He'll never fight back. That's why I say ignorance is more dangerous than bullets, more crippling than poverty, more controlling than any warden, because ignorance teaches you to settle, to accept, to look in the mirror and see a reflection shaped by someone else's story. I was living someone else's story, acting out someone else's definition of who I should be, and I was doing it proudly. That's the tragedy, that's the trick, that's the trap. The moment I started learning, really learning, I felt those chains cracking. Every page I turned was a blow to the mental cell I was living in. Every fact I uncovered was a step toward my liberation. The more I read, the clearer it became I had been set up to fail. Just me, my whole community. Set up to chase dreams that weren't ours. Set up to fight each other. Set up to forget our language, our roots, our unity, our power. And what's worse, the system didn't even have to do much after a while. Because once you condition a man to hate himself, he'll do the rest on his own. I didn't go to school to learn this. I didn't get it from a classroom. I got it from the hunger inside me that grew the moment I realized I'd been lied to. I got it from nights in a prison cell where silence made me listen to the truth. I got it from a burning need to answer one question. Who am I really? Not what society says I am. Not what the media says I am. Not what the court says I am. But what history says I am. What my ancestors say I am. What my God says I am. That knowledge didn't just educate me. It gave me back my soul. They call it self-education, but it was more like self-resurrection. Piece by piece, I was rising from the grave of mental death, the grave of blind consumerism, the grave of racial inferiority. I was coming back to life, not the old life, a new life. A life rooted in truth, guided by wisdom, powered by the kind of clarity that only comes when a man stops running from himself and starts searching. Searching for more than survival. Searching for meaning. Searching for freedom that starts not in your wallet, not in your title, not in your skin, but in your mind. Pain has a way of teaching you what peace never could. It doesn't whisper. It doesn't wait. It hits. It shakes you. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. Pain arrives when your illusions are the loudest, when you're most sure that everything is under control. It comes to strip you, to test you, to break what needs breaking, and most people run from it. Most people hide, numb it, drown it in distractions. But me, I had nowhere to run. I met pain face to face, not once, but over and over again. And eventually I stopped fighting it and started listening. The pain that came from watching my father die, lynched, murdered, silenced by the same forces he fought against. The pain of watching my mother lose herself, inch by inch, broken by a world that treated her strength as madness. The pain of growing up knowing that every authority you're told to trust sees you as less than human. That pain builds something in you, or it destroys you. And at first, it was destroying me. I became cold, hardened, and I stopped caring. I wore my pain like armor. I laughed to cover the rage. I hustled because it gave me a false sense of power. But it was all reaction. Reaction to pain I never processed. Pain I never healed. And that's a dangerous place to live in, where every move you make is just an attempt to avoid feeling what's buried inside. That's how I ended up on the streets. That's how I ended up in the lifestyle. That's how I ended up in prison. People see the outcome and forget the origin. They see the crime but ignore the context. They want to talk about what you did but not what was done to you. That's the sickness of this society. It punishes symptoms and ignores the cause. But once I was locked up, once I was forced to sit in silence with my own reflection, that pain began to speak louder than ever. And for the first time I listened. Pain isn't just suffering. Pain is information. Pain is a signal that something is wrong, something is missing, something is calling you to rise. I used to think my suffering was punishment. But it wasn't. It was preparation. Preparation for something greater than I had ever imagined. I realized I wasn't just being torn down. I was being built up. That pain didn't come to end me. It came to awaken me. Every hardship, every loss, every blow to my pride was chiseling away the falsehoods, carving out a man who could carry a mission. A man who could stand before a system and refuse to bend. A man who could speak for a people too long denied their voice. You see, comfort is where dreams go to die. Comfort keeps you quiet. Comfort makes you compliant. Pain forces you to confront what's real. And when you confront what's real, you begin to change. Not on the surface, but at the core. Pain forces you to ask deeper questions. Who am I really? Why am I here? What am I willing to live for, and what am I willing to die for? Most men never face those questions because they never let themselves go through the fire. They tap out, they settle, they fold. I couldn't afford to fold. I had already lost too much. I had already seen too much. That pain I carried wasn't just mine, it was inherited. It was generational. It was the pain of a stolen name, a stolen language, a stolen past. It was the pain of black men taught to hate themselves before they even know themselves. And when you start to understand that your pain isn't isolated, that it's connected to the struggle of your people, that's when pain becomes power. It becomes a responsibility, a fuel. You stop asking, why me? And you start asking, what now? That's what happened to me. I stopped seeing pain as the enemy. I started seeing it as the door to purpose, the door to fire, the door to truth. That pain showed me the difference between being alive and being awake. I had been alive for years, but I wasn't awake. I was numb, distracted, and pain snapped me out of it. It demanded that I evolve. It demanded that I stop blaming and start building, that I stop surviving and start leading. People talk about purpose like it's something you find on a good day, but it doesn't show up in the sunshine. It shows up in the storm. Purpose is born in the pit, in the silence, in the moments nobody sees, when you're curled up in that cell. When you're looking in the mirror and don't recognize the man staring back at you. That's where purpose begins, not with applause, but with agony. Not with praise, but with pressure. Pressure to rise. Pressure to rebuild. Pressure to become more than the story written for you. And let me tell you, pressure reveals everything. It shows you who's real and who's fake. What's truth and what's convenience. What's solid and what's sand. I had to rebuild myself under that pressure. And I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. I didn't have time to wish it away. I had to stand in that pain and let it burn away the parts of me that didn't belong. I had to face my demons, my ego, my fear, my past. I had to sit in the wreckage of who I was to find the blueprint for who I was becoming. And that blueprint wasn't easy to read. It was written in scars, in memories, in moments of deep, gut-wrenching truth. Pain doesn't ask if you're ready. It just shows up. And the ones who rise aren't the ones who avoid it. They're the ones who walk through it, head held high, eyes wide open. Pain taught me to see. Pain taught me to speak. Pain taught me to fight with a reason, not just with rage. It taught me that every time I got knocked down, I was being shaped into someone stronger. Every time I was overlooked, I was being refined into someone clearer. Every time I lost something I thought I needed, I was gaining something eternal.